Oh, it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. Things that are orange are, like emergency vehicles and tape to block you from going into really dangerous places where you're gonna be hurt and die. Those things are orange. And those little stickers, with the emergency number that go on your phone, are orange. And it's a really just distressing color. It's the color of evil, death, emergency, and destruction. It just makes me nervous, okay? It makes me nervous. I'm Lydia Grey, and I work mainly in performance art, video, photography, some installation. I think that part of what makes performance art and not one of the other media is that the other media have well-defined boundaries, or better defined boundaries. And that you get into performance art and you're not limited by any boundary. You can include music, you can include acting, you can do it on a proscenium stage, you can do it in a cafe, you can do it on the street, you can do it by yourself with no audience, you can do it on a public New York street with everyone as an audience, but they don't realize they're the audience. So I think that would probably be one of my distinctions of performance art versus other performative art forms like stage theater or concert music, would be eliminating those boundaries of what is acceptable in that media. Just with my work, with my performance work, I want people to get something out of it. I'm very interested in sort of the mood or emotion or gut feeling people get out of it. I've been working on a series of Marco Polo performances for the past probably about 4 years now, based on the Venetian adventurer that went from Italy over to China. They're very based on stories, but they're so loosely based on that story that I don't expect people to get that. If you saw the piece without any explanation, I highly doubt that anyone would think of Marco Polo or even realize that it has to do with international travel. In some ways, it's very much an Oz story, a Dorothy story, where you leave home and eventually realize there was a lot of good things at home after all, but you also have all these great adventures and realize there's a lot of good things out in the world too. And maybe learn to balance life. One I've especially liked was two women carrying a bowl of water. And it was held in a way that if either one let go or even relaxed for a little bit, the basin would tilt and splash and fall over. And as they moved through the audience, they took turns alternating and scooping out an ice cube and offering it to the audience as a gift, which is this wet, cold, messy thing that belongs in a glass of soda, not in your hand. But when they get it, inside each ice cube there's a little plastic toy embedded. The catch is, as the audience person, you've received this gift, but you now have to hold it and let it melt and get yourself all wet and cold to get to the toy inside. And that piece was about the people you meet as you travel, the people you meet as you travel through life, the things you offer them, and the things that they have to do in return or choose to do in return. You offer them a gift, but the gift comes enclosed in this wet, cold ice cube. And who chooses to actually get through the ice cube to get to your gift that you're actually giving them, and who doesn't? There's one image is a woman in a long dress. It's the girlfriend in Venice that Marco leaves behind. She's up on a stool that you don't see. She's about probably 4 or 5 feet in the air. And she has a long skirt that's about 25 or 30 feet long. And it's all furled up at her ankles. And the Marco character is saying goodbye, gives her flowers, picks up the bottom of the skirt, and walks off, and the dress unfurls. And finally, when he's 25 or 30 feet away, it pulls taut. And it's the point where he has to decide he's still tethered to home and tied to home life and the girlfriend and everything he was leaving behind. And the decision has to be made to actually let go of the skirt and continue the journey, or is he going to stay tied to home? There's a bathtub image that I used in the most recent Marco that hasn't been used in Marco before, but it's been used in other pieces. I've used it in videos, I've used it in still photography. I hate to even admit this, but the bathtub actually started as an influence from dreams I was having, which I was thinking, oh, she's one of these New Age flaky people with her dream art. But there was this consistent image of a clawfoot bathtub. And this is over the course of a long enough stretch of time that it became a consistent, oh, that was one of those bathtub dreams. I figured, well, I guess I better use it in my work. If it keeps showing up, I better do something with it. Play static. It's beautiful static. What a lovely piece. My own videos are not very narrative, but they have an implied story. Very much like the photographic work and like the performance work. It's a lot of implied narrative. It's a lot of, there's something going on here, the story's not really being told. In all my work, I try to leave the answer very open-ended for the audience to fill in with their own experience, their own background. Whatever the audience brings to the piece is how they interpret it. And especially with the videos, the context that you put that piece in from your own background is going to influence how you see it. There's one piece that it's two people, they each have a fish, and they're just hitting one fish into the other. Then they switch and the other one hits the other one. I've had people interpret that as an animal rights video, cruelty to animals and why is this being done to these fish. I've had it interpreted as a video on violence. I've had it interpreted as a video about sexuality. I've had it interpreted as just a relationship between these two people, sexual or non-sexual. So it's very open-ended and very vaguely defined, but sets up a situation that is questionable. Not questionable in a social sense, but questionable in making the audience ask something of themselves, of the piece, of their culture, of the context the piece is being shown in. There's another piece called Picnic, which is of a watermelon. And it's just a watermelon being cut up. But the extent to which the watermelon is cut up, which is all the way cut and cut and cut, it changes it. And calling it Picnic and then cutting it up to almost mush by the end. Right now I'm teaching video. I enjoy the teaching. I think I learn as much from my students as they learn from me, and sometimes more. Just to see people working at a starting point and how they progress is fascinating. To have that influence of pushing people in a certain direction and yet leaving them free enough to go in their own direction. How to not force students into a preconceived idea and be loose enough to let them do their own work and be creative and come up with a piece that's theirs and they're free enough to actually express something they haven't been able to express before. I just enjoy that whole process. So I have this theory that there's really four major parts to life. You can divide it up into this nice little quadrant system. So the four major quadrants of life are food, sleep, sex, and art. Okay? And pretty much everything can be put into these categories. These four need to balance out to 100%. So if you're a little short on one, you can have a little more on the other. Like if you're making lots and lots of art, like obsessively working on this huge project and just cranking out art like crazy, well, you don't sleep enough and you may skip a few meals, but you're going to come out to your 100% total. If you're having sex as your art form, then you can sort of get two done at once. Or if you're eating food as your art form, or if you're bringing food into sex or sleeping, well, I guess you could sleep as your art form. So sometimes you can accomplish two at once, and then you have to sort of figure out if they double count or single count or how that goes. Whatever someone's job is, that's their art form. Or if they really are very creative with their cooking, that could be their art form and their food element. This puts things in a slot. Thrust. I like work with a thrust to it. Let's talk about the thrust part of my work. I'm very glad that you think my work has thrust to it, okay? I need a sip of caffeine for that.